Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. In this episode, I'm going to talk about something most CTOs don't make time for. Thinking. Not problem solving, not firefighting, not sprint planning. Thinking. I'll explain why strategic foresight is one of the most underrated superpowers a CTO can develop, why it often feels lonely to be the one seeing the future before others do, and how boredom, yes, you heard that right, boredom might be your greatest untapped tool for creative leadership. If you want to lead, not just deliver, stay with me. I'm your host, Adam Horner. As a coach for CTOs from startups to enterprises, I empower tech leaders to escape the cycle of lurching from crisis to crisis and build the skills to lead with confidence, clarity, and purpose. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to share something I've been quietly building behind the scenes and why it matters. If you've ever felt like there's no instruction manual for being a CTO, you're not alone. I felt that too, and I hear it constantly from the CTOs and tech leaders that I work with week in, week out. That's exactly why I created this podcast and why I release it every week, sponsor-free, and free to you, the listener. Because CTO leadership is hard, and you shouldn't have to figure it out alone. Now, I brought everything together under one roof, the CTO Playbook. It's the new home for this podcast, our growing community, and a full suite of coaching programs designed to support you through every stage of the technology leadership journey. Think of it like a mountain. You don't begin at the bottom, but you begin at base camp for the serious climbing preparation, laying the foundation, preparing to lead, and setting your direction. Then comes the elevate phase, where you climb, apply what you've learned, acclimatize to the altitude, and face more complex, high-stakes challenges. And when the terrain gets steep and personal, there's CTO Ascent, a one-to-one coaching program often offering tailored support for the most demanding parts of your journey. This week, I'm especially excited to announce the launch of CTO Basecamp, a new cohort-based coaching program for technology leaders strengthening the leadership foundation. If you're ready to stop figuring out the hard way and start leading with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact, the waitlist is now open, with early access and a discounted rate for those who sign up first. To learn more about CTO Basecamp, CTO Ascent, and what's coming next with CTO Elevate, visit thectoplaybook.com. If you're ready to lead with more intention, structure, and support, everything's there. There's a phrase I hear a lot when I work with CTOs. That makes sense, they say to me. But they don't mean I already knew that. They mean I hadn't thought that far ahead. Seeing ahead is one of the hardest parts of leadership. I remember when I was a kid, my father loves animals, and we always had quite a lot of animals around the house. And at some points we had a pack of terriers. And outside the back, we had a field that had loads and loads of rabbits living in it. And the thing with terriers is that terriers follow their nose. We'd open the back door, or terriers would go rushing out, mouths yapping away. And the thing is, they wouldn't see the rabbits on the hill at the back. They'd basically smell the rabbits that they could. And the first rabbit hole they came to, where the scent was strongest, down they went, scrabbling away into the dirt, trying to get to the almost unattainable rabbits safe in their burrows. And there they were, digging and scratching away, even though just not that far ahead, on the surface, there were rabbits sitting there and watching them amused. I used to go out there and pick up the terriers, and until they were high enough to sort of look further ahead and not any longer scent that, tempting smell on the ground. And the first thing they'd try and do is bite my hands. So being smart, I learned to pick them up slightly further back. And then the second thing they'd do would look at me. And as they looked at me, they would then look at where I was looking. So if I looked up and looked forward and looked at the rabbits on the hill, the next thing they would look at is those rabbits on the hill. And then that makes sense. And before I'd even put them down again, their legs are already going as they're rushing off to try and go and catch those rabbits on the hill. See, CTOs are celebrated for solving complex technical problems, but they're often tempted and distracted by the smells in the local rabbit burrow. And down they go, disappearing down the rabbit hole, and you just don't know where it's going to end sometimes. See, the real value lies in seeing what others don't yet see. What does it take to lead from the front, when no one else sees the horizon that you're pointing to? How can you aim for that rabbit on the hill and not get distracted, scrabbling, scratching away down for the one that's safely nestled in the burrow underneath you? I just want to point out as well that no rabbits were harmed in the making of these metaphors. In fact, when I was growing up, we had one beagle, lovely dog, useless at catching rabbits, except for the one time she very nearly caught one. The only reason she caught the rabbit, or nearly caught the rabbit, was because she'd got it penned in on a tennis court that was surrounded by fencing. 3 of us went rushing to try and stop her from grabbing hold of this rabbit and throwing it in the air or something. As we got closer, though, we just ended up laughing. You see, she'd chased this rabbit around until finally the rabbit just hunkered down on the ground. And the dog, the beagle, she just stopped. Started barking at the rabbit. She just wanted it to play. We're talking about coddled house pets, not the hunting packs of previous generations. So no rabbits were harmed in the making of these metaphors. So the foresight gap then. How do we make sure we're aiming at that rabbit on the hill and not the one in the burrow underground? A lot of CTOs are very much trapped in the present, too reactive, too plugged in, and too distracted to think deeply about the long-term risks, the innovation that needs to happen. And so therefore, we find ourselves going after the local challenge, the local problem. Sometimes my role as coach means thinking 2 to 3 steps ahead of where my client is, asking the questions that they haven't yet framed and don't know how to position. Sometimes it's spotting what their board, their founders, or their team are struggling to articulate and put into words. I'll give you an example. I was recently coaching a CTO who had come to the conclusion that they needed to rework a piece of the technology in their tech stack to modernize it. Fairly typical scenario. So far, so good. And I asked what it meant for the team member currently supporting it. I asked what it meant in terms of the knock-on effect for the customer support team looking after the customers who were reliant on that part of the tech stack. And it was that point that the cascade of implications could be followed like a well-thrown stone skipping across a pond a few times when the surface is still, before sending out ripples from where the thought finally ended its journey with a splash. That makes sense, I heard, while watching that grin spread from ear to ear. You see, it's by thinking several degrees of freedom away from where we're looking that we sometimes get to those conclusions. But once we get to those conclusions and we realize that sort of chain reaction of thoughts, it allows us to think bigger. And as those ripples go out from that point, we can expand our perception quite significantly just because it's further away from where we were looking. So our job as the leader, it's not really to be the loudest voice in the room or to be the one closest to the present. It's to be the one who saw it coming. But that very process is quite terrifying. Why is it terrifying? Because it can be very lonely. We talk about the loneliness of leadership, but this is where it actually gets concrete, it gets real. You see, when you're ahead of the curve, no one's clapping yet. You're out on the edge trying to rally attention for risks or ideas or opportunities that no one else can see or feel the urgency around. So if you get to that point where you're thinking ahead, there's a real risk that you start questioning yourself as you risk being drowned out by the clamor of the here and the now. See, seeing further often means seeing it alone, at least at first. I remember in my early career, I was doing exactly that, trying to think 2 or 3 steps ahead and looking at some of the risks that we need to think about. And in this case, it was about security. And others were thinking, nah, it's not going to be an issue, or I don't see how that's going to be a problem. I don't understand how you get to that thought from where we're at right now. It's too far ahead. And nobody likes to be able to say, I told you so either. So what I did instead was just to start putting in place a few mitigations for in case that risk that I saw came to light. So by the time it did come a lot more concrete, there was already a few things in place that made it easier to deal with. But those early moments where I was thinking, should I do this? Should I not? Am I wasting time and effort and resources? That was the isolation moment. That's the moment where I could easily have thought, actually, I'll leave it. I won't do it right now. Nobody else is worried about it, so therefore I must be wrong. So sometimes it isn't just about thinking further ahead. It's also about having the conviction that we're doing the right thing. Now, that is easier when you've got somebody else to support you. And in a larger organization, often you have a sparring partner, whether you're a CTO with a VP engineering, whether you're a early tech founder with another strong tech lead, whether you're an engineer who's a senior engineer and also has an architect to bounce that idea off, having a thinking partner, somebody else who can validate those thoughts, the implications, and that steps that you've managed to get ahead of where you're at is supremely valuable. If you don't have that, finding an external mentor or a coach can be a remedy to help you with that thinking partner. It's not only about the skills to be able to think that far ahead, it's also about the attitude that you need to think further ahead, and as well, a certain level of natural abstraction. It's almost like the altitude that you need to be able to see the business from higher up. It's like being that terrier that's been picked off the ground and can now see further ahead. So how can we foster this ability to look further ahead? Let's switch gears a bit now and just slow the tempo down a bit. You see, we often talk about sprints and deadlines and deliverables. How often do we think about stillness? I was reminded of this recently. I was watching my kids and my son, very excitable. At some point in almost every afternoon, he gets to the point where he gets bored. And I've learned to just let that boredom fester because something brilliant happens. And it happens when the boredom is allowed, not interrupted. When I don't try and interject with something to do or give him suggestions. What happens is that he ends up in the most creative play at that point. He figures out how he can use a cardboard box or a different toy for a new purpose, or how he can use the area in the garden. Using his imagination, comes up with incredible stories, role-playing that he involves his brother and sister in. And this creativity just comes out of that boredom, when the boredom is allowed, when that stillness, no interruption from me, no intervention is there. So how can we use that to recreate the same kind of creativity and brilliance in our adult lives? Because we tend to avoid boredom whenever we can do. We've got phones, we've got Slack, we've got notifications, we've got back-to-back meetings, we've got productive scrolling, we've got listening to the podcast when we're in the car. We're constantly doing something and filling our time with activities to make sure that we don't feel as though we're letting anybody down. But in doing so, how much are we interrupting the very conditions that create insight? The moments that allow our brain to be still enough to start getting creative. How many of our best ideas come to us when we're not trying, when we're idling, in the shower, on a walk, at the gym? I was listening to another podcast recently by a brilliant guy, used to be a doctor, and he's now an entrepreneur. He's a guy called Ali Abdal. You might have come across him. And he has this habit which intrigued me at first. He goes for a walk. I mean, he's in the middle of London, so he goes for a walk in Hyde Park, but I imagine any park anywhere would do. And all he takes with him, no phone, is a small notebook and a pencil. And he just walks. And the notebook and pencil is just there to catch the creativity that surfaces. It's almost like creating creativity on demand through allowing himself to get bored on purpose. And coming from somebody who used to be a doctor, I thought, brilliant. It's like boredom is the runway and insight is the takeoff moment. So what if you built stillness into our calendars as seriously we build in our stand-ups, as our end of sprint wrap-ups, as our planning meetings? If we put stillness in with that level of priority in our calendar, do we think that our creativity would take off? I think we've certainly given it the wrong way too. So let's try and distill all of those ideas into a tangible, memorable playbook. 3 steps. 1, let's try and zoom out weekly. Let's make space to look beyond the quarter. What's changing in the market? What's changing in our team? What's changing in the overall technology landscape? Step 2, create some boredom. Deliberately disconnect. Go for a walk with no headphones. Block time in your calendar with no agenda. Let your mind wander. Step 3. I think of this as building a signal council. Read outside your domain. Stay active in CTO communities. Join the discussions. Find peers, mentors, a coach who see things differently. People who have a different perspective than you do. News outlets that report news in a different way than you normally read it. People who can challenge your defaults. Try and broaden your approach to thinking. So you don't need to know the future, but you do need to create the conditions to be able to spot it early and the conviction to be able to do something about it. And I know what you're thinking. That makes sense. And I also know that 90% of you listening won't act on this, but I really want you to. Helping CTOs to make these changes is what drives me to do what I do. But it's tough. Strategic thinking is lonely. Boredom feels like wasting time. And we're all about efficiency these days, aren't we? But these are the spaces where leadership is forged. You know, the best CTOs that I coach, they're the ones who slow down just enough to think clearly and then act boldly before anyone else does. If this resonates with you and you're craving for more altitude in your role, let's have a chat. Because leadership isn't just about being right. It's about seeing it before it's even obvious. Thank you very much for listening all the way through to the end. Just before you go, I'd like to ask you for one thing in return for putting together all these episodes of the CTO Playbook podcast for you. Please leave a review. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever platform you're on, leaving a quick review will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.